Hi, I'm Dr. Manpreet Kaur Sethi, and I am practicing rheumatology at the OSMS Fox Valley location. I do want to say that I'm happy to have moved here with my entire family, including my 4-year-old daughter, who is going to start school soon, which makes me nervous, about as much nervous as I am about this talk, because it feels like I'm just talking to myself in this closed room. Now that I've said it, I think I feel better. So first, I do want to take this opportunity to thank all of you in Wisconsin. I originally am from India, and I moved to New Jersey when I came to the United States and got my fellowship opportunity in Omaha. Everybody in New Jersey told me that I was making a mistake, I'm going to the middle of nowhere, or I'm not going to fit in. But I can safely say that Midwest is where I felt that I belonged. So it was natural that when I started, I am actually started talking. Is it going? Okay. Sorry if you can still see me because we are having some technical trouble. Okay. So going back to, I was saying that I moved to Wisconsin because that's where my first job was, and I just have met extraordinary people, whether they were my patients or neighbors, and it's because of all of you being so nice, honest, humble, and kind that I feel Wisconsin is my home, despite the fact that I don't like winters, and my room right now is 85 degrees, and I don't like beer. I only watch WWE at home. And I don't watch the Packers game, although I root for them always because now I am in Wisconsin. Before we start with the talk, there were some things that I think we should cover. So there were some questions that we always get asked about what is OSMS doing to help keep patients safe during the pandemic. Well, as you know, we have unfortunately been in the pandemic for the last 1.5 years, and we continue to strive for patient safety always. We have mask policy and one visitor policy, and there is a whole lot of sanitizing and disinfecting that goes on in front of you as well as behind the scenes as well. So patient safety is definitely very important for all of us here at the OSMS. And I do have a list of some questions that were printed out for me that were on the website and otherwise. And the second thing is, why did I decide to become a doctor? I actually don't know, because I was in 2nd grade when I started to say that I wanted to be a doctor, and it just almost felt like second skin to me. There was nothing else that I could even think about doing. I know why I wanted to be a rheumatologist, because in my med school, the first patient that I ever saw was the patient with scleroderma. And I saw firsthand on how it impacted that patient's life, from social to physical to emotional, that I felt that this is where I wanted to make a difference. So that part I know, but being a doctor, that's hard. So now we are gonna start with the talk before I take any other times, because we have a lot to cover. This is an overview of rheumatic diseases, and what does that mean? Like, are these important? And of course, I practice rheumatology, so of course it's important because I practice it. But more importantly, these diseases take a toll on the patient's life. We all talk about the major illnesses like diabetes or heart disease or stroke, and not that those are not important, but these diseases impact every day of the life of the patient who is living with it. But what are these? So meaning of rheumatic diseases would be disease that are autoimmune in nature and inflammatory in nature at the same time. Autoimmunity would mean that a part of our own immune system is not working properly, and it doesn't mean that it is all overworked or all suppressed, but just a part of it may not be where it belonged, and that results in inflammation of the organ that it is going to. So even though majority of our diseases have joint manifestations, and we certainly see more people with joint disease or joint pain, but these diseases encompass the rest of the body and the rest of the organs as well, which includes the skin, the muscles, the eyes, the heart, the lungs. There are about more than 120 diseases that are known, which are classified as rheumatic diseases. We also see many diseases that are associated with some other systemic diseases, so some other medical problems that the patient may have. But one of the manifestations could be something that looks very typical with rheumatic disease, and that can include some kinds of cancers, some kind of hormonal disorders, or even metabolic disorders like not being able to absorb one thing or the other. They do take a toll on the patient, on the community. These are expensive to take care of because all the medications that we use are very expensive. These are hard to investigate, hard to explain. The presentations vary. The investigations are not 100% specific all the time. So as a patient, it can be very challenging to live with these diseases, and part of these are still unknown. So I do feel that it's good to have an understanding of what people are going through. It's good to have a support system at a personal level, but also have a good medical team where you can go back and forth and discuss anything that comes to your mind. So, and as I start with the overview and we talk about some specific diseases, I do want to explain and say that anything that I say may not apply to you 100% because every patient is different. So do try to take it with a grain of salt. Discuss it with your rheumatologist if you have questions or concerns, or your primary care physician, because there may be a lot of overlap here. What causes rheumatic diseases? So there are many theories on how it happens, but the general consensus is that majority of the autoimmune diseases or rheumatic diseases have some genetic component to it, and there are several genes involved where there might be mutations in just in plain words, like just some parts of the genetic system might have changed. There may be some heredity involved because some of those things can be passed on to the next generation, but not all of those factors will be passed on to the next generation. So it's not 100% heredity that everybody who has rheumatic disease will pass it on to their child 100% of the times. No, there are other factors. We do think that the first thing comes with priming of the body with the genetic system. However, the second thing comes with the environment. And there is a second hit phenomena which most of us believe in, and that could be like an infection, that could be an accident or something that can precipitate what was already going on in the body or changed how the body was processing things. In addition, we do think that there are risk factors. So many patients may have other additional risk factors like smoking and obesity. So we do think that although those things may not cause the rheumatic disease de novo or like as a new fresh presentation, but it can certainly modify the presentation, certainly can make it more aggressive. Not in everything, but in many of the diseases that we treat. So having said that, there are a lot, as I said, a lot of rheumatic diseases, but the most common would be something like gout, some rheumatoid arthritis, osteoarthritis as well, although that's not autoimmune, but because of the joint manifestations, it's not unusual for the rheumatologist to be the first person who sees osteoarthritis, which is the degenerative arthritis. So I'm going to start with gout, and then I'm going to also keep an eye on any questions that are coming up. And I also have a page here because there were some questions that we received beforehand, and I'm going to try to answer them as we go. So first, let's talk about gout. I'm going to lump gout with another thing called pseudogout. Both of these joint diseases specifically would present with red hot swollen joints. Typically, it is the lower leg or lower extremity, starting with the toe, but it can also involve the ankle, and it can also involve the knee. In a typical patient with gout or pseudo gout, this comes on all of a sudden with a red hot painful swelling that is the most severe pain that they might have had in the joint. It does involve significant inflammation, and the diagnosis is made by the physical exam and possibly tapping the joint, meaning taking out the fluid from the joint and observing it under the microscope to see if there are crystals. And the crystals could define whether it is gout or pseudo gout. We do think that it happens because there have been some metabolic disturbance. So either we are producing the uric acid more, so there is increased level of a chemical in the body, and it starts to get deposited in different joints. Now, how much will it deposit and in which patient? It depends on a lot of factors within that particular patient. So once the diagnosis is made, the idea is to calm down the joint flare, because this is so significant in inflammation that it can also result in a lot of damage. So untreated over the years, there will be a whole lot of joint damage with gout. I might even say that it would be as much or maybe more than the rheumatoid arthritis if it was uncontrolled. There is treatment, however, available, and most patients, I would say, respond to the treatment with gout. Some of the medications that we use would be to bring the uric acid level down, because that's what we think is the cause of the problem. So we use allopurinol or febuxostat, or there is an infusion pegloticase, and which one does the patient need depends on that particular patient. Now, these treatments only will reduce the uric acid level, but what we also want to do at the same time would be to calm down the inflammation that is already happening, because that is the reason for the pain at that time. And that is done by, again, 2-3 different things. So majority of the times gout goes away within 1 to 2 weeks, or at least calms down. And I have seen many patients who would just say, hey, I'm just living with it. Not that that's what I advise, but some people, may choose to do that. However, the treatment can be with anti-inflammatories, which are non-steroidal agents like ibuprofen, meloxicam, indomethacin. The other possibility would be to take steroids, and steroids can be taken orally or they can be injected into the joint, depending upon, again, how accessible that joint location was, or other medications like colchicine. So although we do treat people with colchicine or steroids or NSAIDs, we do know that that's just on the surface. That is for the acute attack, but we need to treat the underlying problem with the other medications. And again, I do think that many people do very well with gout. It does take a little bit of time to get everything under control, but that does usually happen. Similar to that was the pseudo gout, which I was bringing up. So pseudo gout, it's pseudo gout, so it behaves like gout, but it isn't. So when we tap the joint, we sometimes find crystals that are actually made up of a different compound or calcium pyrophosphate, and that is how we know that this was a different disease. The treatment for that is difficult. We do try to look at underlying causes and see if there was some other underlying metabolism problem that maybe we can find and maybe we can correct, and in many patients we can't find that. The treatment would be the anti-inflammatories or steroids for that particular joint if it is one joint, or orally if there was more than one joint. And we do sometimes try other medications, because there are many people with the pseudo gout who may have recurrent attacks, and just being on steroids forever or anti-inflammatories forever sometimes doesn't work out. So we do try other things with this kind of arthritis as well. And then maybe a little briefly about rheumatoid arthritis, which I think can be a whole talk for an entire day, because we probably know more about rheumatoid arthritis because this has been the most widely studied disease. There are many pharmaceutical companies who are still trying to make different medications, but nonetheless, it is still a disease that we have not been able to treat 100% of the times, which I wish was different, because despite all the upcoming medications, I would not be able to say that all my patients with rheumatoid arthritis do well 100% of the times. Unfortunately, many a times these medications do not work out that well. However, there are several of those available right now that we can choose, and which one to choose depends on the patient specifically. What is rheumatoid arthritis? So this is not a disease of the old age usually. This can happen this happens mostly in women, and the typical age group would be somewhere between 20 to 50. My patient, who is now approximately 69, told me that the first time she was diagnosed, or when doctors figured out that she had something, was when she was 2 years of age. So the age, does not really define the disease. This disease is manifested by inflammation of several joints at the same time. We do typically say that textbook-wise, it's a symmetrical disease, meaning left and right hand at the same time. It typically goes to the small joints, so it would be these joints and these joints usually where people start to notice that there is more stiffness when they wake up in the morning especially, and the stiffness tends to get better as the time goes on. This can be associated with joint damage because this lingering inflammation going on for months to years, sometimes unfortunately, and of course it would come with pain. And again, just like many other autoimmune diseases, the joint definitely gets affected more, or probably is the more common presentation, but this is a systemic disease, meaning it can affect other organs. So it can certainly involve the lungs, it can involve the eyes. Uncontrolled, it can cause a lot of problems in different organ systems. We do think that it increases the chances of heart disease, especially if untreated. And when the medications are used to treat this disease, not only does it help with the comfort because the joint pain is going to get better, the joint damage is going to get less and less, or the progression of the joint damage, I should say, would be less and less. And at the same time, we do think that it also protects us from the unwanted consequences of uncontrolled inflammation in the body. And the treatment of rheumatoid arthritis also helps address some of those concerns, because in the past, and as we read in the books, which luckily we don't see anymore, is that some of the patients with rheumatoid arthritis end up having specific kind of leukemia that is related to that disease. And when I started my fellowship, the first thing that I heard from my great attending was that I probably will never see it during my practice, just because we have better treatment now. So treating this disease does involve a whole lot of balancing approach. So first thing would be to make the correct diagnosis, which would be based on the physical exam, based on the symptoms, based on x-rays, blood work. There are specific blood work that are associated with it, which is CCP and rheumatoid factor for people who are interested. We also need to know that not everybody will have a positive blood work with this disease, and that's where the physical exam and the history comes into picture. Once we have established the diagnosis, the idea would be to find out, okay, what treatment works for that particular patient, because they may have some other associated conditions. They may have a mild disease, they may have a more severe disease. So do we make some changes in the lifestyle? And that I hear that question a lot of times in the practice as to what could the patient do to make this disease better. I'm gonna stress that when we talk about lifestyle changes, I don't personally believe that it can completely cure the disease by following some lifestyle choices. However, I do feel that following some specific lifestyle choices can make it feel better. So there are people who try some herbal supplements as anti-inflammatory, or acupuncture because it helps with the joint pain. And again, I'm not going to say that those are treatment, but they may help to alleviate some of the discomfort that comes with it. There are many people who try anti-inflammatory diet, and I feel that is probably more to each their own, because not every kind of patient will respond to the same specific set of instructions, because we know that every patient is different. There was an underlying genetic difference amongst every patient that we saw. In addition, I do think that there is a role for some therapy options, heat and ice. Again, not something that would completely treat it. However, it can keep our joints limber while we are going through those phases. In addition, then the role would be the medications, which probably would be the main pillar. I wish that there were other ways to solve all these problems. And I'm sure that as a patient, we all worry about the side effects of the medications when we know that many of these medications will interact with the immune system, because we think that the autoimmunity is the reason. So immune system was the original problem. So the only way to try to find a relief for the disease would be to interact with the immune system to make it a little bit better. And we do know, however, that despite all the side effects that may come with the medications, the life expectancy of patients with rheumatoid arthritis is more than what it was in the past when there were no medications. So despite the possibility of side effects, we do think that overall these medications are beneficial to the patients. And there are several medications. Again, that would be a whole topic for the whole day to talk about each and every medication specifically. But if any of you who is listening and who probably has some concerns that they have these multiple joint involvement with some swelling, and this also goes to the feet, by the way, probably the foot is probably the first presentation in majority of the patients, and then it goes to the hands. If you have concerns, do talk to your primary care physician or see a rheumatologist and consider the role of other medications. Then there was a question in between for the osteoarthritis as well, so I'm just going to talk briefly. Osteoarthritis in general, we all talk about wear and tear. In my opinion, it's not just wear and tear alone. There are other components that make this happen. What is osteoarthritis? So osteoarthritis would be a joint disease that is characterized by some bone spurs or irregular cartilage or wearing down of cartilage, meaning that there has been some damage to the cartilage that has been progressing gradually, usually. Sometimes an injury can make that faster, and typically it is not associated with the inflammation that we see in rheumatoid arthritis or gout, for example. So these are not the patients who typically will come in with a red hot swollen joint or 10 joints involved all of a sudden. These are the patients where there may be a gradual worsening or achiness of one joint and getting worse as the time goes on. And of course, as we all age, we get osteoarthritis, and sometimes we may have it in the thumbs, which would be right here. So many people would have the pain right here. The main common location would be the knee. So even though we do think that it may be just one or two joints, in our lifetime, however, we'd start seeing many more joints getting involved. And when I said that it is not just wear and tear, don't get me wrong, the wear and tear does play a role. We certainly see osteoarthritis in the older age groups, but I do feel that our heredity, metabolism, some other factors like body weight, those things also play a role on how the osteoarthritis progresses. We certainly see osteoarthritis in these joints, which are the knuckles close to the fingertips. Which is, one of the main common locations for osteoarthritis as well, and we see it mostly in the women, which can be very painful. But certainly we don't walk on these fingers, so it's not just like, hey, we are walking on it, so the joints are getting, worn out. Unfortunately, there have been many medications that are being tried for this. I'm just going to answer a technical question for this talk with somebody who is actually helping me. So the man behind the scenes, I'm just going to take this minute to text. I'm sorry. With the osteoarthritis, as many medications as have been tried, and in fact in the last 1 year, I think there was another medication that we thought would be able to change the outcome of this disease, because it certainly affects a whole lot more people than many other autoimmune diseases. But unfortunately, so far, we don't have a good treatment for that. We do, however, feel that we can make a difference in their life, because the pain from osteoarthritis does not only come from the joint bone spur. The pain will come from the soft tissues around it. The pain will come from the deconditioning of the muscles around it. And many of those things can be changed. Of course, joint replacement it could also be in the picture, depending upon how bad and which joints are involved. So the idea would be that first we figure out what kind of disease are we looking at, and then we decide what treatment could be done about that. I'm gonna again take a look at some of the questions, because as I said, there are a lot of rheumatic diseases and we probably can't cover all of them. As we have more time, I'll briefly touch base on some of the others that are not in the question. So the first question was, can you explain more about the polymyalgia rheumatica and what the symptoms are? So that's a very good question. We do actually see it more in the rheumatology clinic in comparison to many of the other rare diseases. It's probably, however, not significantly common in the whole community, when it comes to like how many people go to a primary care physician. So polymyalgia rheumatica typically would be a disease that presents mostly in people above 50 years of age. There are many people who would say that maybe it's more for people above 65 years of age, but by definition it could be anybody above 50. The typical presentation would be something that comes on rather suddenly, something that I was fine, on Saturday, and by Monday or Tuesday I had some significant pain. Usually the patients would describe the pain being in the shoulders, going down, and sometimes in the arms. Typically in a full-blown presentation, and by full-blown I mean the very first day when you have the symptom, it might just be one shoulder, but if we waited a couple of days or a few days, we might see both shoulders are involved. So, in a full-blown presentation, we would say that this is the patient who would say, I can't lift my arms up all of a sudden because of the pain, not the weakness. And the similar kind of pain would be felt in the lower part, which would be around the hip area, or I can't sit on the chair because that area hurts, or my groin hurts. And many of these people will also have pain in the neck area or in the spine area. What happens behind in the body is that there is inflammation of the bursa, which is basically kind of a lining between joints and different muscle group. Would be the best way that I can explain here, but that is why the pain is more widespread with that disease, and the similar areas of ligaments and bursas are inflamed throughout the spine, so many people would feel kind of locked down with that entire thing, and the pain is terrible from what I hear from all my patients. The treatment revolves mainly around the prednisone as the starting point. Prednisone would be a steroid. Because this is inflammation of different bursas, we do give steroids more orally so that it affects the entire body. And we start at a certain dose, and that dose varies from patient to patient. And then the idea would be that we try to taper this dose as the time goes on. And I'm looking at my cell phone because we are getting some questions on that as well. And as I said, that we will try to cover as many of those as we can. With the prednisone, the idea would be that we would taper off the medications gradually over time. I would say, some patients will get lucky, and within the next couple of years, we may not need to take any medication and the disease might be gone. But unfortunately, we all see some patients where there may be some lingering symptom, sometimes enough that it is controlled with a little bit of steroid, but sometimes it requires addition of some other medications. Then the next question is there any way to slow down osteoarthritis, like eating habits, exercise, etc.? That's a good question. Per my knowledge, I don't think that I'm going to use the word that we could slow down the underlying process of degeneration by changing the diet. As I said, that it has a lot of mixed things that cause those bone spurs. Maybe degeneration is also not the entire word. That wouldn't explain the whole osteoarthritis spectrum. Because there is some genetics involved, there is some metabolism involved. However, I do feel that the eating habits and exercise can play a role in how we feel, because the pain comes from a lot of tissues. We do think, for example, that the knee osteoarthritis, women tend to feel the pain more with the knee osteoarthritis, and maybe I would say that they represent a bigger majority of the people with the same disease. Second, the involvement of these joints. So the exercise certainly helps in maintaining the mobility of the joint. The exercise would help in strengthening the muscles around the joint so that there is less stress on the joint itself that was already having some bone spurs and some abnormalities in the cartilage. The exercise would also help in maintaining the balance, because when you are hurting in the knee, it is expected that when you all of a sudden start to take a few steps, the balance may be off. The eating habits would help because, let's say that if I weighed a little bit more than what I weigh now, I am putting extra weight on my bad joints as well, and reducing that weight will somehow help offload my joint a little bit. So those things are very important. In fact, some of those things form part of the guidelines from the American College of Rheumatology, which is the main organization for us here in the US. They do form part of the guidelines because we do think that these are low risk things that have the potential to benefit. I don't think that I'm going to just say that it will change the entire presentation of the disease. I wish that it could, though. The next question is, what is the difference between rheumatoid arthritis and osteoarthritis? So I think we briefly touched on it before, but I'm going to go at it again. So rheumatoid arthritis would be a disease of inflammation, joint swelling, morning stiffness that actually gets better as the time of the day goes on or as we move our joints. Osteoarthritis, on the other hand, is a disease where we will be stiff in the morning, we will gel up if we are in one sitting position for a long time, but it doesn't usually take us hours to move. In fact, the more we move, the more we're going to hurt with the osteoarthritis is the typical presentation. The second thing would be that, again, for the physician, you are seeing the difference would be in your exam. So is there more joint swelling, more joint warmth that is appreciated with that presentation or not? The exam would also tell us if we feel some bone, palpable bone spurs. The location of the joint matters. So is it just mainly in the knees and mainly in these joints, which is more osteoarthritis, or is it all of these joints in hands and feet that are involved, which is more like rheumatoid arthritis? Then there would be a difference in the x-rays, there would be a difference in the blood work. So a whole lot goes into defining which one is which, and I'll be honest, in some cases I do think that there can be an overlap enough that it complicates or confuses everybody involved in that situation. The next question is, what does rheumatoid arthritis feel like to most people, and does it vary based on degree? So I think that you basically, just like what you said, I think your understanding is correct. So the answer is right there. Yes, it does vary based on the degree. So for majority of the people with rheumatoid arthritis, as a third person, because I only hear what my patients say, and what I have heard from them is the stiffness in the morning that they describe. It is not always a significant amount of pain. In fact, I have seen patients where their pain score is 1, even though I'm seeing the joint damage from that. So on a day-to-day basis, I do feel that there is an overwhelming stiffness, especially in the morning, that they all feel, even if they don't describe the pain as much. And could it be really bad? Yes, we do see significant joint damage with the rheumatoid arthritis. Unfortunately, I've seen patients with big swollen joints that feel lumpy throughout, with some nodules that can come on in the elbows or like behind the heels or near the Achilles area, with a significant amount of joint damage. And there are other people who may have a relatively milder presentation, I do still feel that all of them need to be treated, but depending upon the degree, of course, which medications are they going to need will differ. Then there was another, it's not really a question, but more like a comment, and I don't think that we were able to obtain more information on this. The comment was, my joints hurt, but not sure if it's from COVID or arthritis. It's gonna be hard to say, without actually being able to see you. We do know that many patients with COVID have experienced joint pains after. In the past, even before this COVID happened, which is still relatively new and we are still exploring this disease more, but even in the past we know that there are arthritis that happen from viral diseases. There are specific viruses that are associated with some joint diseases. We have Lyme, that is an infection that is associated with joint disease. Tuberculosis can cause arthritis. So it wouldn't be unusual to expect that another kind of a viral or an infectious illness also had some presentation with the joint. We are seeing some case reports as well where people have had more joint pain or pain in general after the COVID, and I think that is an active area of research right now. Of course, the same person can also have arthritis, and maybe somebody has rheumatoid arthritis and just happen to have COVID. So I think that not having more history on this would make it a little bit harder, but if you have concerns, I would suggest that you see your primary care physician, or maybe one of us, maybe a rheumatologist where you live, depending upon where you are, to answer this question. Then there was another question that we got today which says, please explain mixed connective tissue disease. And there is a positive ANA and a speckled pattern for several years, and also a diagnosis of fibromyalgia. So mixed connective tissue disease encompasses a wide variety of symptoms. It is one of the diseases which we call as diffuse connective tissue disease, and by diffuse I mean that there can be a diffuse generalized involvement. It is not just the joints, it's not just the muscles, it can be the skin, it can be the blood vessels, it can be the lungs. So a wide variety of presentation could certainly be there. How we know or how we try to identify mixed connective tissue disease would be to again take a look at the entire picture. So in a typical textbook scenario, the patient is usually a young female who presents with somewhat puffy fingers and hands. So it's not just the joint swelling here, they may be just puffy throughout. And many of those patients will have what is called Raynaud's phenomena. So that would be that there is discoloration of fingers or toes on exposure to cold or vibration or things like that. So there would be a sharp demarcation, and beyond that there would be red, white, blue changes. That is called Raynaud's, and we think that is because of abnormalities in the blood vessels with the function of the blood vessels or abnormality of the blood vessels. So again, a typical textbook scenario would be that. However, that's not entirely it. So when we call it mixed, or diffuse, what we mean is that it can have overlapping features. So many people may have some manifestations that look like, oh, this may go into lupus, or this may go into rheumatoid arthritis because this patient has more joint disease or joint swelling or joint damage. On the other hand, there might be a patient who has some muscle involvement, or I have somebody who has a little bit of this and that. And that's what comprises mixed connective tissue disease. There may be an overlap syndrome that we try to differentiate from, like could it be just two different diseases that are overlapping, or is this mixed connective tissue disease? So in that typical patient, we typically see that there would be a very high titer ANA, probably higher than what I typically see in my lupus patients. Speckled pattern, as mentioned here, certainly can be seen with mixed connective tissue disease, but more often than not, because we know that the pattern, we have much more specific antibodies now, so we do try to see a different set of antibodies with that patient. So the breakdown of that ANA may reveal that there is a positive RNP antibody, which is usually associated with the mixed connective tissue disease. Certainly there can be overlap. Can I see a mixed connective tissue disease without this? Yes. Or can I see people who do not have mixed connective tissue disease with the RNP antibody? Absolutely yes. It's again like taking into account the whole entire picture and seeing if that fits in. So many people with mixed connective tissue disease, again will have that muscle pain and joint pain. And that would also be similar to what somebody may have with fibromyalgia. So that would require a comprehensive exam. So if I see somebody who has joint pain, the idea would be, do I see inflammation? Do I see a joint range of motion abnormality? Am I suspecting that this is inflammation or not? Second thing would be that when I see muscle pain, in general we say that the muscle diseases that we see are usually painless. However, in mixed connective tissue disease, there may be an overlap there. And sometimes, if I had to go into the detail, that is what I would have, requested to see, like, are the muscles involved? Do we have a lab evidence that the muscles are involved? Do we see an objective evidence of joint inflammation or not? Do we have the rest of the labs? Do we have Raynaud's? Then there are some specific things that we do is that we try to take a look at these capillaries under the nail fold, and sometimes those can be abnormal with mixed connective tissue disease. So I hope that answers your question again, because it does have a wide range of symptom manifestations and a wide range of organ involvement. It's hard to just completely go over all of these, but I'm sure that if you're seeing a rheumatologist, they would be able to explain one way or the other. And I'm gonna again take a look at some of the other questions. So, best treatment for juvenile arthritis. That is a very good question, but a very comprehensive one. So when we use the term juvenile arthritis, we do, first of all, we have like a different kind of pattern of juvenile arthritis. And I think that just lumping it in one term would be difficult, and I might mislead you. That's not what I want to do. Because there may be a presentation that is more characteristic, with the psoriasis. There may be a presentation that is more characteristic with a positive ANA and eye involvement versus somebody who may have something that looks more like rheumatoid. Somebody may have only like less than 4 joints involved and bigger joints involved. On the other hand, somebody else may have more than 5 joints involved, and everybody is going to be different. So the treatment is dependent on what we are actually dealing with and what is the presentation of the juvenile arthritis that we are treating at the same time. So if it is just one joint, some people would just only start with anti-inflammatories if that's the only manifestation. However, even amongst kids, sometimes that's not enough, or sometimes there may be more joints involved or more worry for the joint damage. We do try to refrain from steroids as much as we can, although it's not always easy, but because we do worry about the long-term consequences of the medications that we are using. However, many of the same treatment that we use for adults are used in treatment for juvenile arthritis as well. And safety of those medications has also been checked through different studies. So I don't think that I can be more specific about the best treatment, because it truly does vary about the patient, their whole other picture, like what other conditions do they have, what are their expectations, how severe is their disease, and what organ is it affecting, because that's how we decide on how urgent or aggressive the treatment should be. Then the next question is, can a patient be weaned off medications for RA if it is controlled or mild? We all feel that the weaning of the treatment, hopefully should happen, right? We all want to find a cure, but I think it depends on the rheumatoid arthritis as well, in my opinion. So I have seen some patients where they may have a rheumatoid arthritis that is very mild, And there is something called seronegative rheumatoid arthritis, where it actually doesn't show up in the blood, and then we sometimes think that, hey, maybe there was something else that we already treated and maybe it won't come back. It doesn't necessarily mean that it was a milder illness. It may actually be more difficult to treat than the other one. But in that scenario, if somebody is doing really well and really in remission, the idea would be to try to definitely decrease the medication to the level where we feel that this would be commensurate with the side effects or the adverse effects that are more tolerable for the amount of the disease that you are in. But when it comes to a full-blown rheumatoid arthritis, I don't necessarily believe that it goes into remission forever. I wish that it did, but there are many studies that are conducted where the treatment was given, patient is in good control, then we take off the treatment, then we say, okay, it comes back after 1 year. Now, when it comes back after 1 year, did we do more damage because there was some uncontrolled things under the surface? So can we wean off and minimize medications? Absolutely. Do we take off the medications? I think that would be difficult, although I can't specifically answer to your condition, because that may be different. I think that would be a good discussion with your rheumatologist, but certainly a discussion that is worth having. Let's see the next question. What do you recommend for hair loss and joint pain from lupus? So the first thing would be to treat the disease, because both of those are manifestations of the disease itself. Now, certainly we can see hair loss in people otherwise, like I have hair loss and I don't have lupus, so there may be some overlapping things, and we don't always know if the hair loss is coming from one condition or the other. There should be a communication with your dermatologist as well as your rheumatologist to try to identify if that is related to the underlying disease activity. If it is a specific kind of hair loss, sometimes a dermatologist can help you with some topical ointments, sometimes with some injections, depending upon, again, the kind of hair loss that we have. But if we have joint pain and the hair loss, sometimes the joint pain and hair loss may reveal active lupus disease. And the idea would be to then treat the lupus with the medications that we commonly use, and the common medications would be like hydroxychloroquine. And then depending upon if the joint pains are still not covered, then you move on to different medication choices, and there are like azathioprine, methotrexate, Benlysta, many more. There is one new approved now, anifrolumab. So again, having a good discussion with the rheumatologist in addition to your overall health, because we know that lupus again is a systemic disease, the whole body is affected. So taking care of your diet, taking care of exercise, those things are also going to be helpful in maintaining the overall body, and hopefully even in the hair loss. Then the next question is, could having COVID cause joint pains months later? So you can never say never, especially when there is a new disease, and we will probably see some new manifestations over the next couple of years, and we'll figure out more. But months later would make me question if it is truly related to COVID, or is there something else going on. Some of the patients that I have seen with some pain after COVID typically have not been months later. I would say maybe like a couple of weeks later, or 2 to 4 weeks later, but not really months. So I would suggest that you see somebody for it, and then maybe they can help you decide. Someone has Sjogren's and lupus. Are they typically treated the same? Yes and no. So definitely there is a whole lot of overlap between the two in terms of manifestations, in terms of blood work, and in terms of the signs. We do start off the treatment similarly, but that depends on what manifestations are we really having, because with the Sjogren's syndrome, the most common presentation would be that we have dry eyes, dry mouth, and that necessarily cannot be changed with the medications that we use for lupus. In a lupus patient, they may have more skin rashes and more joint pain, in which case we typically start with hydroxychloroquine or start moving on with that immune suppression route. Now those are not the medications that I would think or would expect that would change the dry eyes and dry mouth considerably. However, let's say that the Sjogren's syndrome patient also has the same kind of rash problem or similar joint problems. Yes, in that case I would probably start with the same treatment options, depending upon again the rest of the manifestations, on whether or not the heart is involved or the kidney is involved. The treatment would end up differing depending upon the complications that we have with the disease. And let me see if there is one more question. Okay, so I think that we are going over our time. I hope that I was able to answer some of the questions. I know that we couldn't cover everything because there is not as much time, but hopefully maybe we can do it again. I do want to thank all of you who tuned in to this talk, and if you have any questions, if you have any problems with the joints especially, or if you feel that there is something else going on where you may have some disease after talking to your primary care physician, please feel free to call us or make an appointment at the osmsgb.com. We have a great group of orthopedics as well as rheumatology physicians in Green Bay location as well as Fox Valley, and we now also cover some of the other locations, and hopefully we can solve all the problems related to the joints in one place, even if it's an injury. So I hope you all have a good day, have a good evening, stay safe.